Yeah, so let's get to it. I'm not sure this is working. Is it?
Teams window.
Okay.
Let me just make sure that.
So yeah, we use this. So today, the goals of the presentation is one to talk about the epistemic injustice, majorly focusing on the representation of non-Western scholarship. Also, I will try as much as possible to talk about African epistemologies that we have maybe as a pathway to enrich the current practices. Then talk about the emerging practices, a way to address the epistemic injustice, and also to include African epistemologies in research. And also, lastly, something that I think is important is to talk to mind the barriers, factors that can super charging epistemic injustice. So let's get to it. Majorly, I'll be talking from the angle of psychology. That's my area. By extension, behavioral science. So myself and some friends, we try to estimate the distribution of awards in psychology. And you can see that 90% of this award from, this is a renowned journal, Society for Personality and Social Psychology. 90% of these awards uh, were given to people from the US. And we know as a researcher, the echelon or the point of our recognition is to have awards to recognize the wonderful work that we're doing. So if we have these awards going like 90% to the US, then that means the others are just struggling to get the remaining 10%. So, and that's could speak to the plurality issue that we are not seeing, because it's almost like we're having a single narrative, and that is the US narrative versus other narrative that can be available beyond the US. Also, that shows that there is a mainstream versus the marginalized group. Uh, Also, it indicates that there is a Noah that we consider more valid than others. Okay. Today, my point is about what Africa is going through, the underrepresentation of Africa, not just sample, but also thought researchers. And this is an image of the Psychological Science Accelerator. So they are known for like big team science, and they have labs distributed across the globe. But if you look at the map, Africa is still underrepresented a lot. Just about 1% of the labs for the PSA is from Africa. So during this presentation, you'll be seeing like a yellow highlighted text. So these are texts that I want to use to guide a presentation, or like posing questions about the presentation. So the first question here is, how is it being perpetrated? How is epistemic injustice being perpetrated? One is the colonial legacy that we cannot ignore, and the other one is Western dominance in research. So the colonial legacy, so what is this all about? What we see in meta research is minimally tackled, even in methods that we use. The cultural implication of our findings, linguistic relevance, and even the experience of research are still like heavily influenced by colonialism. But it's a question of how do we decolonize psychology. It's a difficult question to answer, because it's a systemic issue that surrounds the whole society. So I think as academic, we have a little influence or what we can do about this. But there's something we can do actually, is to look at the Western dominance in research and see maybe we can change some things to help us get others involved in research globally. So the first one is, question will be what methods and approaches are dominant in research, and whose thoughts and what research questions do we do ask when we're doing research, and also who is the source knowledge for what we are talking about. And lastly, the one that I would like to put is whose resources and infrastructure are we working with. So epistemic injustice in global research. The first question is, what methodologies and approaches do we get to use? There's a prejudice to the knowledge specific that we use, and we know that most of the knowledge, texts, literature, theories that we sort of like keep using are from the US and maybe to some extent Western Europe. And so this sort of guide the procedure of knowledge generation, and is Western heavy and still maintained the scholarship system that we find ourselves today, and all I would say we use for generating knowledge. So even in Africa, like the Western design curriculum is still heavily unchanged. A lot of African researchers still depend on texts from Western scholars to guide findings or the research. So that brings to mind the issue of Western knowledge versus indigenous knowledge. So it's something that we should think carefully, that how can indigenous knowledge become prioritized or become a subject of interest for researcher without them thinking, if they go that direction, how are they going to get their career going and not have to depend on Western knowledge. The second question is whose thoughts and what research question. For this, it's about the context-specific discrimination, about what contents we have in knowledge. There is a number of people have tried to, find a way of explaining this or trying to find answers to question of whose thoughts and what research questions. One of them is Terry and colleagues that talk about the word questions. The word is Western educated, industrially rich and democratic societies. And this includes like the US and the Western Europe. So basically what we see is that they are the ones that are posing these questions. It's almost all the questions are to try to find answers to the issues in the world populations. Also, there is an issue of word instruments. This is a situation, and most of the instruments that we use, even if we try to culturally adapt or translate them in local languages for meaningfulness or sort of adaptation, we are still relying on word instruments to do research. And the last one here is interest and relevance. So this is the one I usually want to go to because I ask question about, so whose interest is research do we carry out, or what relevance is this research to researchers and even to the societies that we are working or we are trying to understand the behavior. So, and this sort of like leads to what we call the helicopter science, where people just come and just cast their net to collect data without actually involving the locals in the process, or even trying to train locals in understanding or getting this kind of knowledge. And they just leave. Maybe sometimes they don't even give merits to the locals, and that's it. So all these are a question of whose thoughts and research question, and we can say that it's majorly the Western thoughts and the question are generated from the West texts or theories. Also, who is the source of this knowledge? So this is about the group-based sort of like discrimination that we see in epistemic injustice. Unfortunately, a lot of journals and funders still looks to like, where is the knowledge coming from? If you're not, sorry to say, maybe white from the US, and it's quite difficult to break through or to look past that for them to really trust what the knowledge you bring in and what source are you bringing this from. So I've seen this play out all, but we don't have to dwell on it. I believe the important thing is we get people that are marginalized in front of the Western, scholars, so that they see that we can actually produce and they can trust the source of the knowledge and just not the source from our Western scholar. So it's an issue of person versus the credibility of the knower, and also the knower now of is this person visible or is this person credible, and also what are the capacity deficiency that we see. And I can say in, for example, Nigeria, we still need a lot of good scientists, and we still need scientists that have depth, that have like vast expertise in carrying out some sort of like research. So there's still discrimination there, and I think with time we can work towards that, but we should know that this is an issue. So this part is about the resource and infrastructure. When we look at research partnership, what we find out that the person that have the funding sort of like dictates the direction or the research questions that you get. And poor resource that society or researchers that have limited funding don't get to say much about where they want to go with the research. So sometimes they have to depend on, sometimes people that decides the direction are the funders, and the funders are majorly people from the US. And if they want to go a certain direction, as a researcher that doesn't have fund and you're looking to make impacts, you still sort of like key into that direction or just follow through, even reluctantly, to just make sure like you have something that you can present, as part of what you've achieved in your career. So there's a discrimination in terms of the resources and the capacity of what you can do or what you cannot do or what direction you can go. So I say realities differ because there's poor facilities, there's regulation, and we need some sort of human development to be able to catch up with the Western part. So I've talked about the helicopter science, and so is it partners or opportunists that is coming in to just pick stuff? So whose resources and infrastructure determines if somebody becomes just find itself to be just collecting data or just like actively part of or deciding the direction of your research. Okay, so we've seen all this stuff. We talked about the discrimination. So I know researchers, scholars, we have demands like every day. So yeah, if I ask a Western researcher, does it worth it to solve this epistemic injustice? Like, do I need to say, yeah, I can do my research and have my publication and I'm fine and have my career? Do I need to go all out to look for somebody somewhere in Africa to want to work with, or it could be an issue? So I say it's worth it because what you will find out is that you can improve rigor and transparency of your research that you do. Also, you can expand your research questions, theories, and epistemologies on how you can, direction of research or what approach you can use. Aside that, we know right now that what we have in psychology, for example, is difficult for us to replicate a good number of our research or claims. And that means if we're able to go all out because it's worth it, we can able to find studies that are applicable, that are generalizable, and also we are more inclusive. We can kind of create a more inclusive science. So we can take a personality example. So I just want to let my tongue go. Sorry, please. Okay, so the example I'll give you is the 5-factor model. This model is Western-centric because developed by a Westerner and it's for Western societies. So how it applies to Africans is unclear, although it's it's a theory that have far-reaching, like very popular theory. And you can imagine Africans that depends on Western texts have used this like for their research to try to get something out of it. But it's still unclear how you will interpret this for an African, okay? And even with or without cultural adaptation, so it's still an issue to apply this in the African settings. Because for Western individualistic psychology, it focuses on the self as an independent and autonomous person. But in Africa psychology, the focus is more like a relational self because it's about the self in the community. So you cannot remove an individual, and person cannot really stand alone and able to say is open without thinking about the society or the group that surrounds him or the family. So, and this is shaped by this idea of self in Africa is shaped by, for example, a concept of omoluabi, like a person would concept that somebody is, you're responsible and you're hardworking and you're responsible for people in the community and you have to show integrity. So whatever you do, you cannot just go outside or just isolate yourself to want to say, I am this. No, so you cannot say I am without others, and that's the idea of the Ubuntu. So when we look at all these concepts, we know if you take the example of the five-factor model, we know it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to interpret or determine what it actually means to be open, to be agreeable for an African. Okay, so the yellow highlighted questions. So are there epistemologies unique to Africa, and how do they look like? So over time, because of the same problem, you can imagine scholars from Africa and even outside Africa have tried to call for indigenous psychology. So it's a psychology that can be incorporated into the higher education. So people can learn psychology from the African perspective. Okay, so one of these idea is the idea that's intellectual traditional one that I will try to explain this. Like you can have issues on the surface and you can go deeper on the surface, almost like a wax that you have to unveil. Then later you go deeper to address these issues. So based on the idea of the Kinel, I looked at three approaches that is emphasized when you want to incorporate African epistemology. One is that this epistemology should be informal in a way and vocational system. So this should focus on practical hands-on skills. So there is this one about the Igbo apprenticeship system. So this is a very powerful system and it's been studied even outside Africa now. So it's very powerful because you can have a mentor-mentee situation when the mentee will spend years with this mentor. Like it's more like a business idea. The mentee spend a lot of time with the mentor. During this time, he learns ethics, learn business, and after this period, he can become independent on its own. And he too, we have mentees, so it's almost like mentors, mentee kind of, and it goes like that. And this allows them to build like a strong business economic base. And so it's been studied and it's really working for especially the Igbo people because this is their own method, traditional method of expanding business, and they're doing well with this. It's a good system. So for our our educational system of our we believe if you want us to understand science more, we need to look at our informal and vocational system to build human capacity, to build human development. Also, African epistemology should be holistic, meaning we have to go beyond what we have in the West that is majorly like empirical observation, testing, to include like storytelling sort of ideas and proverbs then myths. One good example of this is the Ifa philosophy. So the IFA philosophy is rooted in sort of like storytelling, but after saying the story, there is a lesson behind, and the lesson can have far-reaching like impact on different aspects of life, different concepts. It includes like gender identity, it includes like marriage, it includes religion, medicine, and we have the IFA philosophy. Again, this is gaining traction right now. I've seen a lot of videos online of people talking about it now. But I still feel it's still grossly untapped. It's still like waiting there for people to discover. In fact, some people feel that the IFA philosophy is more like a science because it's a set of knowledge that is practically how to do science in a way, but is unexplored. So for us to build the epistemology, or for Western researcher, they can look towards sort of this kind of epistemology and integrate that in the system and make it holistic, beyond empirical, and test stories on written knowledge or set of knowledge that can be infused into uh, written or observation kind of direction. Also, we believe for African epistemology approach, it should be communal system, meaning everybody should be responsible or have a role to play. So when you're learning, or there's a particular knowledge you're trying to get, that knowledge should speak to communal responsibility and role, and that makes you part of the community. And you, by doing that, you learn a lot of stuff, and you can do well for yourself and do well for the community. I've mentioned the Ubuntu one because you cannot be without the other. So when you're learning, when you're trying to pass knowledge, or when you're trying to generate knowledge, you think about yourself as you know, and you think about the community as benefiting from this knowledge. So that is the idea of pluralism. For me, I feel should be multiple lines of inquiry. So I have this code that I say, I'll just read it out like that. So the idea would be not to pick one best system, Western or otherwise, but multiple scientific system of know-how. So it could be a mixture of method that is appropriate for investigation, depending on the research questions, best practices, the target population, and the realities. So by doing this, just following this method, you don't have to rely on a particular theory from the West, but you are more open to theories or a way or an approach that you can get other society that are non-Western to able to understand them and able to study what phenomenon that is available there. And you have to look at the realities of you doing that, the ethics of running a specific or trying to find answers to some questions. Yeah, so there is the propositional attitude to predict behavior. I will just rely on the Kinel traditional proposition. So the idea is that on the surface of a problem, there is a wax. It's not very strong, but it's important to understand the wax as just understanding a concept. But later you can do like the good critical analysis. This will be like an in-depth analysis of an issue. In a way, I can relate this to how we try to solve problem as a researcher in Africa, because we are more focused on problem solving situation. We have issues that, for example, say diseases, poverty. So for us, you need on the wax on the surface, you need to establish who is poor and how do you define how somebody is poor. Then you can go like an in-depth analysis by doing like a gold digging kind of, go deeper by understanding the determinants of poverty, why people are poor. So the first one is to recognize the attitude that are complex representation with the truth values. And also you can do more nuances with measurements, the influence. So this is just beyond association to understanding the underlying determinants. So this is an interesting proposition that I feel could be very useful for Africans. And I think people from the West, maybe before trying to run empirical or trying to go in terms of theoretical stuff, you can try and do what we call exploratory study to understand the concepts on the surface. Then after that, you can go for like an empirical or confirmatory kind of analysis, like in-depth after understanding what this subject is all about. So we're still talking about inclusive research through African perspective. So there are emerging approaches. So they are basically like research partnership. So I think that's the way we can go is to form partnership across divides to allow people get involved and you can experience them and they can experience you. You can understand this. So by so doing, we can form an equality and equity and not helicopter science. So, and we have like all hands on deck situation. The issue of the equality and equity that came up like I think 2 years ago because we always want to say let's just do something with equality, but there's the equity part of it because some people they don't have the privilege of some maybe expertise, and so we need to be consigned and understand their own limitation so that we can be at par, not just to ignore if they don't have the skills and say, well, you don't have it, then forget about it. But they could contribute something different, and that will bring them to, to be more inclusive or more part of what we are doing. So the first approach is the big team science. So this one is gaining a lot of attention. The way I will explain is that running a big study, but in a way that everybody is contributing to it, and you can run as large as possible study without that you cannot do with a even single study. So this idea has been floated like a couple of years. PSA is one of the psychological science is one of the leading initiatives for this. We have the many babies, we have many primates, and so I actually take a clue from this idea. That's why I have the many labs Africa to just test findings from Africa in Western population actually. So we can go about the big team science. One, you can try to look out for initiatives around. I don't know, maybe some of us are familiar with this. So if we are familiar with this, we can try as much as possible to be part of it. Because it allows you to contribute your little. You don't have to do all the whole job because there are other people that are working. And that gives room for everyone, Western, from the US, wherever you are from, gives everybody a chance to contribute their own knowledge to the research. So you can try and find some of this initiative around. Also, you can lead your own initiative. I believe that strongly because I did one and I've seen a lot of people like the many labs 1, 2, 3, well, I think up to 5 right now. These are like an individual ad hoc initiative of many lab study, and that allows them to get across to other people that they are to reach researchers in different part of the world, and they're able to come up with some interesting findings. Also, emerging approach is the replication direction. I think replication naturally should be part of the science hallmark of science. We should be able to replicate our findings, but we know now that some findings, like a whole lot of psychological claims, we can't replicate them. So part of how we can help to be inclusive in research is to try to replicate studies, not just in your population, but replicate in a different population, in different settings, and see if you will be able to replicate that. And the advantage of this is that by the time you want to replicate, you discover there is a whole lot of processes that you have to go through, maybe translation, cultural adaptation, ethics. And sometimes maybe when you're trying to do that, you discover that the question you're asking doesn't even have, is not interesting or is not relevant for the population that you want to work with. Then you get to know what is relevant and how you can push what your ideas and match that with whatever is coming from your partners in the different populations to understand the research or the theoretical part better. So part of the emerging approaches is the replication part, and a lot of people have talked about this, and people are really replication, reproducibility ideas, reproducing whatever somebody have done, start check, able to check your stats, or able to develop measures that are sort of global in a way, like you can measure and you can use that across different cultures. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the many labs Africa, just to give an idea of what I did, and maybe it's just broadly. So the many labs Africa is a transnational replication claims that originally discovered in Africa. We have 3 claims and we have about 8 effects. And interestingly, they are all like sexual behavior direction. So that tells us something that these are sort of like findings the Africans are looking to solve. Some of them are about teenage pregnancy. One is about extramarital affair. One is about condom use. So, but this is just by us just asking them to nominate findings and tell us what they think should be, what is important, and not just putting ourselves in their face and saying, we want you to do this. No, tell us what you want us to do. And we found out like all these findings are about like sexual behavior. So for the many labs Africa, the first thing we did is or for you, if you're interested in something like many labs, is for you to find partners to work with. We have independent researcher that you can, if you have their institutional contacts, you can reach out to them and tell them about what you want to do, explain in details how you want them to be involved in the project. Also, you can reach out to researchers or members of the Big Team Science Organization, like the Psychology Science Accelerator. And you can make a general call on social media and see maybe somebody will be interested in the study. So that's the first step. You need to get partners. The other one is that you need to know the locals' priorities, their interests, and if the study is going to be relevant to them. So this one, I'm very particular about this one because I feel most times we just, even for victim science, and that was where I came, like some of them just designed the study entirely and ask somebody in Nigeria, do you want to collect data for this? Like, but so when someone that doesn't have resources and wants to, want visibility, to say reluctantly, okay, maybe to make sense, and so they will help collect the data, but they are not convinced that it makes any sense to want to do this kind of study, and they won't ask you like, why are you doing this study? Okay, so because they don't feel like they're part of the project. So one thing that you can do is to, at the conceptualization stage, when you're designing the study, is to ask questions about priorities. Like, what do you think this is interesting for you or your society, or like, how do you think, how is this relevant? You can even ask them to, what direction are you going to go with this idea? And that opens up like a lot of ideas that you don't even know about, a lot of epistemological approach that you can go, and they will tell you. Okay. So yeah, I'm unable to talk much about this, the interest, because I don't know, maybe you have some people will be attending the workshop tomorrow. I will talk more in detail about specifically what we did to able to get people to tell us what will be their interest and what is relevant to them. So just that's almost like a step-by-step sort of like criteria that we used. So I think for people that will be there tomorrow, sorry, I can't just go into details because of time, and I didn't prepare for that today. So tomorrow, I think we will talk more about that. So other part of the big team science project that you should look out for is consider the ethics requirement. In fact, in some cases, even for my study, that is something from Africa. Some countries say the African countries are like they can't do that. Okay, because some of them will talk about like it's unethical to ask sort of like questions. Even for okay, so one interesting one for me even till now is gender identity is in Nigeria is you don't want to put the participants in risk, legal risk of uh, revealing their gender identity. So sometimes we have to limit the amount of questions that we ask just to like male, female, others, or if they prefer not to answer the question, because it's a cultural thing and it's somehow there's an ethics issue related to that. And so that's interesting for me, even from Nigeria, to know that we can do that. And for some other countries in Africa, maybe so you can do that. But Western researcher might not even have an idea of this. A lot of them didn't even have an idea. Why are you not asking that question? Why should you ask the question? Is it that I say it's something that is risky for me, for the participants. So let's keep that question, So, yeah. So you mind the ethics requirements, then you might want to obtain ethics approval from the locals. Also, you can evaluate facilities that are available to them, resources that are available to them, to understand how to work better with this group. So also, if possible, and I think maybe we should do this, is to understand the partners' expertise. Some of them are good maybe in writing, and they're not good in method in a way, or like data analysis. Some might be good in data analysis, but they are weak in other. So when you understand this, you know the sort of the way they can contribute to research, and that will be a whole lot better for all parties involved in the project. So I just want to conclude by saying what would be the advantages, or why should we do this? One, we can have like we can able to build stronger local and indigenous psychologists across the globe when we understand the epistemologies and the approaches from other culture. And also we can build more generalizable theories, claims, and interventions than what we have right now, okay? Then we can have stronger methods to work with, like when you have diverse methods like this, so you can choose from some that can be very interesting to able to answer your questions. You can go quantitative, you can go qualitative method, and can look at from different approaches to answer questions. Also, we can have a greater inclusion, diversity, and expansion in psychology, and of course in other fields when we use the big team science. So lastly, just is about for us to mind barriers. So when we are going into this sort of projects, a few things for us to watch out for is one, we should avoid attitude of complacency. Say, doesn't concern me, I'm not really bothered about it. I will just do it the way I want to do it, whatever happens. But don't let us be complacent about the situation. Let's try to do something. Don't say you've listened to me now. Don't say "Mm, that doesn't really matter. But try. Just make that move to reach out to somebody in a different culture, and maybe something will come out from there. Maybe you might end up having a great idea that that will just make your career like blossom better, or something that you'll be proud of. Uh, Also, there are biases and misunderstanding about African context. I understand this in point of access to literature, because I've seen people, I've heard that they don't have access to some literature, and sometimes they're just stuck on the little one, and they just based everything on that's the one that's accessible to them. Well, I feel with time, maybe Africa scholarship will come up with a more, accessible way of getting their work out there. Some other continents are doing better. I understand that, but we should not have these biases. We should seek knowledge, understanding of what are available there. Don't just base on whatever you know. You can contact researchers, African researchers, and ask them, do you know somebody that's a researcher of these certain concepts in Africans? And we can. I've done that a number of times, helped to reach out to people, and we're able to find people in different fields, and they were able to. And some of them they are in partnership with some researchers from the US, Norway, France, and so please don't just base on that it's not there. You can find something, and don't misunderstand the African context. And the African context is a very interesting one. So it's not it's something that is worth uh, looking out for, or worth just exploring. So avoid the helicopter science. Those you just want to collect data, no inputs, no credit to the locals. Um, that's not it's not the best way to go about it. Then positionality. Yeah, so this one is difficult. I hope we know that we we can. Sometimes we don't have to hold a position and over the other person and feel just from your own position you just make a conclusion. Okay, you can shift your position a bit and say, okay, let me. I've seen people, a lot of people like say, yeah, I don't want to be like the one that have the knowledge and everything, the knower. I just want to be the one that wants to learn from the other person. So you can just take the position of the learner and learn from others. Okay. Yeah. So solve the barriers, inadequate funds for African researcher, even from Western researchers. I know funds are limited too, and you want to try as much as possible to maximize what you have. Uh, but the case for Africa is pretty bad, compared to what we have in the Western world. But just mind this barrier that there is no funds. There is no a lot of them do their research out of their personal purse. A lot of them, even myself, I've done that like several times. And sometimes it's unimaginable to Westerners, like you do research with your personal funds. I say yes, we do this. So so there are ethics abounds everywhere. Watch out for those ethics. Sometimes you might not be able to do anything because of ethical issues. Yes, so that will be the end of it. I hope I'm able to do some stuff. So thank you for your attention.
You can feel free to take your own questions. I'll be watching if we have any questions from online.
Okay.
I just have a question. You mentioned a workshop tomorrow.
Yes.
Is there information on that workshop? Online? Okay, cool.
Okay. Yeah, so feel free to ask me any questions. Very naive question, I will take it. I like to get feedback. Yes. Yes.
So obviously, all the slides you were showing, all this research is done in English language, based on English language sources, theories, and so on and so on.
Yes.
And if anything, I find this movement is getting stronger. So 2 years ago, I put together a course on decolonization of psychology and language. And what I found quite suddenly surprising was that if you look at the sources, let's say from the 50s, like, Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, he cites work in different languages. He cites also work in French, Spanish, and so on. If you go to something modern, it's in English. And speaking about Africa, I've been going for quite regularly now to Nairobi to a meeting on every 2 years on dementia in lower and middle income countries. And there was a movement which was mentioned and noticed by people from Africa that the percentage of people from non-English speaking countries in Africa is going like this. So basically, last time there was one single person from Francophone Africa, from Congo, and no one, of course, from Portuguese speaking, and so on. So is there any realistic hope? And I mean, particularly since you are at a French university, so I think that's quite fascinating for me. Is there any hope of having any movement if we confine everything, all the knowledge production to, should we, for instance, in West learn a little bit more about what you say, the African concept and so on? Shouldn't we try to maybe apply Ubuntu to us like the Africans will apply the notion, so to say, from, so yeah, that would be my question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can use Ubuntu concepts in the Western world. And I think some people are trying this. I don't have like a specific, but it's gaining traction in terms of how a self can function in a community. I believe personally, I believe is not cannot be out of context for the Western world, because I believe it's a community, but maybe not as strong involvement into the society as what we have in Africa. But that could explain why some people basically still wants to be part of a lot of community, or depending on what culture. So the Europe is just not just one culture. There might be some culture that have similar behavioral or cultural affinity with a culture in Africa. So if you apply the Ubuntu to them, you might find out that they actually have, you might be able to generalize or apply that, or have a closer culture with a community in Africa. Okay, yeah. So, and I also get the concept of the francophone speaking countries. So this is a tough one, because again, the English sort of like dominates most of the texts that we have in the research are like written in English. And actually, in some francophone speaking country in Africa, some have their texts written in French, some in Arabic. And in the course of running my studies, even the first and the second one, we had to culturally adapt some languages into something that is meaningful for the locals to even able to answer an item in the instruments, or we have to translate that in the local context. And by doing that alone, we're able to bring in more people from non-English speaking community, and able to sample people from those communities. It takes a lot of effort to do this, because I mean, I think it's easy to just run your study in English, just look for participants that can read English, and maybe online they have the privilege, they're educated, and that's it. Then you have your study and you run that, and if you have the skills or the expertise to be able to write well and just look for a journal, and you're able to play the game, you might just get it published, and that's it. But it doesn't help psychology, for example, because that means we have this very tiny population that we are working with. So part of what we should do is to make efforts to reach out to them. I believe this is possible. It's going to take a long time, but psychology is better off doing this and able to have more robust theory. So maybe that clarifies some of answers for your questions. So thank you for your question.
from mainstream global culture that psychologists and anthropologists are very interested in studying to try to understand these processes relatively different from society. So yeah, are there certain groups that are actually really represented locally, or just hearing? I'm interested to hear you talk about this type of variation.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. Like, so when I talk about Africa, so my points about Africa is that sometimes I'm not very comfortable just saying Africa, because I think this is a very big, diverse continent with like over 1,000 languages, 45 countries, and within countries you have regions with different languages and different cultural diversity. So, but from my position, I still have to push forward Africa, because I don't want to push forward just Nigeria, because some other countries in Africa, like some country like maybe West African countries, you can see they share similar realities, and they experience similar situation, or they have similar concepts. Like the Ubuntu concept I talked about, sort of like it might be more profound in Eastern or Southern Africa, but we see some of these ideas in other concepts in different parts of Africa, okay? So yes, there are underrepresented groups in Africa, and why one is the non-English speaking group, because automatically when you want to do studies like this and it's written, the instrument is prepared in English, and there are uneducated people that can, even within English speaking countries, there are people that are uneducated, they can answer your questions in English. So what you're probably dealing with is having the weird group of Africa, young, educated, they can speak English, they have the privilege to have attended colleges. So it's more or less like this is this group that researchers, psychologists are again working with in Africa. So, or they live in urban areas. So this group, there are people working. I have Dr. Sakshi is working on something about urban and rural, sample representation, because it's a problem, because somehow we are neglecting some group, and we have this group in Africa that we do neglect. Most times we go to urban, educated, young, someone that can speak English, and so, or someone that they have internets. Okay, so, but we still have to work with them in order to get something. But I hope with time we can expand and do better, reach out to this how to reach a population and get them involved in research, even in Africa. Yeah.
Find questions like we and as going individual, independent. So what are the connections with capital, for instance? Benefits from the idea of the individual and the that is put that as opposed to speciality, and so rather than about them as characters, often circles Western, is it an essential character? Why? And then
Yeah, so that's a difficult one for me to answer. Yeah, so whose interest is being served? If we decide not to overlook some concept of like maybe in India, like you said, they look towards like more independent autonomous group rights, or they're just doing this research. Most times, I usually think funders are like the ultimate sort of like decider of what direction we do go in research, because uh, they detect a lot of who gets what's in the first place, because they have a lot of proposal, and if they have proposal that fits their own agenda, and if it's something about trying to understand the Western people from an angle of individualistic or independent individual, so they fund that more. You might even able to see like I even feel like right now some areas of research are getting sort of like more funding just based on this is the direction the funder wants to go. It doesn't really matter in India or in Nigeria. For example, the issue about gender identity looks like it's gaining traction, and we are seeing some funding, and even so that there's a funding recently. A colleague of mine, she's in Switzerland. She's in Switzerland. She got a funding, and what she got funding for is to see if the gender, just to understand gender identity or issue in countries like Nigeria, like globally, even if that doesn't really serve a country like India, but the funder right now is interested in, let's just find it out. Let's find out what India is thinking about gender identity kind of situation. And how does that serve India? I don't know. Okay. But that serves the funder or people that feel like they are in charge of determining where and what to go, or like what knowledge is important. So I don't know how to answer this question like that, because I know it's complicated, because I'm not in charge of who decides what direction to go. But maybe what we can do is when we are doing studies like this, is to, at the conceptualization stage, we try to talk to people from that country and ask them, is this important to you? No, or if this is important or not important, what direction do you think we can go? So by doing so, we're able to, serve their purpose to some extent, or serve the purpose of a marginalized group, and able to understand them. Maybe as a researcher, we can try to not just stick to agendas or purpose for different people or funders, but for us to understand people and help the communities. Yeah, so it's sort of like tricky to answer this kind of question, because I don't know people that controls funding or people that controls purpose for research. So it's for us to do research better, even if we feel what we are doing doesn't serve the purpose of a specific population. But we can try to run studies that benefits them a bit, or part of the study benefits this population. Sometimes studies might include like a mobile lab. Maybe try to reach out people at the like rural kind of like group, even though it doesn't benefit them, but or even though they are not captured in what will be the purpose for the research, you can try to reach out and include them in what you do. So I think it's on us, for us to do better reach outs. Then we can, whatever people that are doing the funding are doing, fine. But for us, let's try to go above and beyond in some cases to try and include people. You're welcome. It's just,
Um,
Yeah.
research exists is a function, I guess, of two things, at least like what research is being produced, and that's funding, and we've spoken about today, the collaborations, what's questions are being asked, but also what's being published, like what's being shared in the academic community. And I was wondering to get your thoughts on that second part of the process. Do you see journals and maybe even editors and reviewers as part of the barrier here, and how could they be part of the?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, so this is the second part of the situation we are. Uh, so again, a lot of people are talking about, they're talking about this because editors of most journals, mainstream journals, in fact, mainstream journals are a lot of them in the US. And their editors are more like white, male, American. And they are like the gatekeepers of what is produced or what knowledge is shared. And we all know if you can publish or peer review your work, it's difficult for people to have confidence in citing it or to base their own knowledge or their own explanation theory on that. So it's a tough one because we are trying to break that down also. I've seen a few changes. I was part of a committee that recommended something for the SPSP, the journal, on how we can get people involved. And part of the recommendation is to have like associate editors, like from different countries or different regions. So they can have them, maybe they're not the main editor, but they can be part of the process in a way they are learning how it works there. And maybe someday they can get to the top and, I mean, they can open up the publication. They can try to reduce the publication bias, or try to make it more open to other people that are not that are non-Western. So I think, and some journals are actually trying to break down these barriers. For example, APC, the article processing charges, some are so expensive that an African researcher will not even able to afford that. He's still struggling to get his research done, and you're talking about $1,005. So he has not even seen that in the whole year because the whole salary is not even up to that for the whole year. So, and the government is not really trying to help. So in this kind of situation, the system is already like locked down. There is no point submitting for peer review. And even if they submit, sometimes you find people saying they are not native speakers, and maybe they can't write well, they are not communicating well, and just based on that, even if there is a merit in the work, they are just thrown out, and they're not considered for further review. So it's a serious issue, and I think some people are doing something. I'm part of a few people that just try to recommend why we should make it better. Sometimes waive the APC, sometimes just have some quota for people that are not Americans to be part of it. Sometimes make effort not to have an American male as the editor in chief, and some journals are doing that. Yeah.
Even in other languages, where it's in it's happening like very this is the context. So a right way to be in the part even it is a more ends up happening now is we have research that supports kind of narrative in South African context from pacification, but it has nothing to do with actual work. How do you improve people on having to take the concepts and apply them in ways that they can?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have examples like, as an example of this situation where the person that is talking about Ubuntu or even the killing is somebody that is not from the culture. So the way I understand it is, I think that is the part of like inclusive research, because it means they've made efforts to reach out and understand the concepts. Because I feel it's still a positive thing in a way, because they just these concepts are just lying there. A lot of people cannot even get it out to get it in the face of people to understand what is happening with it. And it's the same concept that it could happen to any researcher. People just trying to understand. We're all trying to understand something. We're not trying to generate knowledge. Okay, so if you have somebody go to, like the Omoluabi concept, the person that she's a Nigerian, but you can tell she's affiliated to somewhere in the United States. So maybe she has all our education from there, and she doesn't have a slight anything strongly related or with the culture, but she still tries to come up with something. And maybe with time, we have people that understand the concept well, that they know how to apply it to their society, advance, this knowledge from whoever have tried to do something, or maybe they are not getting it right, but they've made efforts. And this, I think, is important, because we don't have that, like, a lot, but people are trying to do something. Just trying to do something is key to understanding whatever phenomenon better. And people that have the requested knowledge or the expertise or the understanding or the local contents of the concepts, with time, joining and able to get it out there. That's the way I would think about it. But we should not worry too much about if it's misapplied or something. But the fact that we have people working on this is important, and with time, others can join in. The people with local contexts knowledge will come on board and work with it. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, yeah.
Something new. It is like a
Yeah, helicopter is nice. Y-
I think more than just effort. I do think we need to pressure Westerners to make more effort when coming from actually learn the language to people. I don't think for me it's not enough to make an effort. It has to be an ethical effort.
I get where you're coming from. I've seen researchers go to stay years in Africa, and they study the people there, and they start writing. Okay, by my own opinion about this, I understand where you're coming from. That we have to maybe want to require people to learn a language or learn a culture. That might even discourage people. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not saying they should be discouraged, and I mean we should make efforts. I mean they should make efforts to want to understand the culture that they want to work with. Okay. I was at a conference in Germany. So this is like a group of area studies. they have similar issues like this. Some of them said they can't go there because there's risk of staying somewhere they don't understand, and they can't learn the language, and they don't know what's happening, so they can only rely on local people to do research. My point is that we still need to get people out there, and we want them to do better. Of course, we want them, if they have to learn the language, the culture, the way, or the way to understand this concept better, fine. But the fact that we want to encourage people to know that there are concepts there in the first place, like that is the idea of the surface. Understand on the surface if there's something. Okay, when you understand that there's something, then you can now do like an in-depth analysis of that. Well, what do we have left if we allow people to at least understand? Okay, so I will not put so much weight on insisting on doing some specific stuff. Okay, but if they want to go that way, fine. If they just need people that understand the concepts and talk to them, you might be at your place. You can be you can be here and talk to people, and they can give you ideas. The fact that you can just move back and say, well, this is an idea I know you people understand better. Just do it and tell me how I can come into the space. And that is the positionality that I was trying to talk about, that you should be willing to learn how to deal with it. Even just say you don't understand the concept, then learn from people that understand the concepts. And by so doing, in a way, you have this understanding. Maybe you can avoid misapplying that to a different to the population, or know the appropriate way to apply that. I mean, any way we can get to the answer, I mean, we should do it rightly. But the first thing is for us to make sure that people are comfortable, people are willing to want to reach across the divide and say, yes, I want to work with this concept. Because right now we are not really having that a lot, and it's not helping psychology or any field of study. Yeah. Yeah.
Specialized understandings tailored to the population. So I'd like to sort of challenge you on whether or not your research you're advocating for creates more generalized, specialized knowledge.
Specialized knowledge versus generalizable knowledge. I think it could be both, or in a way, depending. Yeah, or it could be specialized if you're looking at the settings or the concept of if you're narrowing down the concepts or the theory that you're talking about. It could become more specialized. Also, you can look at it as generalizable, because if you're looking towards a different population, okay. So when you look out for a different population, what you open up a situation where it might not be very specialized, because that means you broaden the ideas that can be there and to what level it can generalize or not. So we can have these two things play out, can become very specific because they stick to a particular maybe settings and try to, in a way, understand that better for the same settings or same population. But to generalize that, you have to go beyond the settings or population to expand the applicability of whatever you're working with. And that is majorly what I did, is to say, yeah, we understand this concept at this way, maybe just specialize for this, then let's open it up. And when you start doing that, sometimes it might generalize to some level, it might not. So that's sort of like take away the specialization part of it, and they open up a lot of more room. Maybe with time, it becomes better, generalizable, then become more specialized when you're working with it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to buy into that. Because it's me, like, maybe like, or is it more about, because even if this is true, what that means, practice of law, how do we issues directly data that come.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. I get where you're coming from. So let's take the like big five example. So what is openness in the African context? Okay. Do you mean how do you measure that? Because the instrument on its own, okay, I'll give you an example of my first study is about moral transgression. So this study was designed, developed, and measured and everything in the United States. So it's about harmed and versus purity transgression. How do you define that? For example, if somebody punch another person 10 times versus 1 time, then if somebody desecrates a sacred land or house or something. The African population that I used for this study, they rated all like the impurity, purity transgression like so high. They're like almost 90 ratings. And I had myself the same question. Yeah, somebody like commit incest with the sibling. How do I rate that as 70% wrong or right? It has to like be like very high. But for some reason, the US sample were able to like moderate their ratings like so. So sometimes we can interpret this as the way that was my interpretation. That it's difficult for the African person to find a moderation to rates like between 70, 80, and it's sort of like not the case for somebody in the United States. So that's an interpretation. But in that case, we are not just generalizing, we are not just saying where this is how people are good. In that case, the people can moderate that in Africa. Okay, as part of the population is in Morocco, like they are like sort of like religious and all the religious items that are like just like so. So the cap was just it has this very funny violin shape. But the paper will be out soon, so maybe you can read something about transgression. It's a replication of Rothman and Young study, very popular study that people feel like, yeah, we're able to replicate it, but we have situations like this that we have to point out that there's a problem the way people rate stuff. And that was our interpretation. We didn't throw away completely that the theory is not there. The theory is there. We find this stuff, but there's a different way of looking at it for an African person. Again, we see that the African person thinks about purity transgression as something that is both impure and as well harmful to people, even though it's not a physical something, but they feel in the context of their community, if you commit something like an incident, it's sort of like harmful to the whole community. Like they can't say that is bad, or they don't have the concept, or they just infuse the rating of harmfulness into purity transgression. So but we have find this and we try to interpret, try to understand based on what we are looking at. So, and that's something you can do even when you're trying to understand personality. You might have openness, maybe not as people not as open, or maybe the interpretation as in the Western population you find in the African. And when you just say this, it opens up to a lot of people understand the concept of the Big Five better. If you're trying to come up with a new concept, you can as well open up, like do like an exploratory stuff. How do you define, for example, love? There's a study, a friend of mine. How do you define love or romantic relationship? And there was so many definitions of romantic. So they tried to aggregate and find like a center way of how people from different culture understand love. In some culture, they don't even know how to define that because they don't sound like, yeah, we don't have this. What do you mean by this? Okay. So, and this is like building up like an instrument. But for me, I feel that instrument is going to cut across a lot of culture because they touch on different countries, different cultures. And if they have like a standard measure that would help based on interpretation of what you find on that scale, you can relate to different cultures and say, and be able to say, okay, this applies to some extent to this. It's almost like the cultural distance of on a particular concept. So, hey,